Farmers and farming. Who really needs farmers or the farming industry? I know on this channel I've always been very pro-farmer, but recently I've been giving it a bit more thought about whether we actually need the farming industry at all. And this comes on the back of the Labour Party deciding that obviously small farmers are very asset rich because the land on their farms is worth a lot of money. Now the Labour Party's decided that they should no longer be exempt from inheritance tax. They should pay their fair share and, quite frankly, good on them. Tax the rich. That's what I say. I mean, really think about it. Who even eats food? When was the last time you had a meal? I certainly can't remember the last time I had a meal. I'm a regular guy. I just live on cigarettes, Waitrose, Prosecco, yoga, maybe a bit of photosynthesizing in the back garden to sustain my energy levels. Food is it's for the elites. It's for the billionaires. We don't need food. So we can get rid of the farming industry. We can really hammer down on it. That's my perspective, and actually it's the perspective of all rational thinking people in today's society. So I hope you agree with that, and I hope you get on board. I mean, think about it. Farmers, millionaires, strolling around in their flashy 30-year-old Land Rovers, carrying broken barrel shotguns over their shoulder, ready to shoot the peasants or the pheasants. I can never remember, but the point is, we don't need farmers. Let's get rid of them. Tax them to hell. Now, if you think that sounds ridiculous, I agree with you. It does sound ridiculous, and that's because it is ridiculous. And yet, for some reason, some people do genuinely seem to think this way. Very recently, a former Labour advisor went on to GB News and said exactly this. Farming is an industry we can do without.
I'm personally in favour of doing to farmers want to go on the streets, we can do to them what Margaret Thatcher did to the miners.
So just to be clear, John, you would, beat them up?
No, close them. I mean, there's an industry we could do without.
So, okay, all right, so this got weird. So you would do to farmers what Margaret Thatcher did to miners, which was, she
closed down industry.
Now, I can't pretend really to understand this logic. The idea that we can do without the farming industry makes no sense to me whatsoever. At best, I can assume that what they mean is that we can simply import all of our food. We don't need our own farmers here. So let's assume that that's their position and go through it. Well, has Britain ever made a mistake like this in the past? Yes, it has. During the Second World War, the biggest threat that Churchill saw to Britain and to the war effort was not a military threat. I mean, it was a military threat in a way, but it was really that we would be starved into submission. Because we live on this small island, and we were importing at the time 75% of the food that British people then ate, he was worried that the German U-boats would sink all of those ships, we would be starved, and we would have to sign some kind of peace treaty, effectively giving up the war. That was what Churchill saw as the greatest threat. So what did they do to counter this? Well, obviously it was a bit of a crisis, and they had this campaign called Dig for Victory. I'll put one of the posters up now, but the idea was to get people, ordinary men and women in Britain, growing their own food, because we'd so badly outsourced the production of our food that we were now really, really vulnerable. Now, by 1945, food production had gone from 25% of what the UK eats to 75%. So it was radically successful, but it's recently fallen back down to 60%. We've become slowly more reliant on outsourcing our food and getting food from overseas. And admittedly, some of the food simply can't be grown here. We just don't have the right climate or the right conditions to grow food. I understand that, so it's never going to be 100%. We're never going to be 100% sustainable in that respect. But it just makes you think, these people who suggest that we can simply rely on outsourcing our food supply to other people are crazy. That leaves us so vulnerable, so vulnerable. Now consider this point just for another second. Where exactly in the world does all of this food come from? Well, it comes from Ukraine. Well, not all of it. Obviously, there's loads and loads of different countries, but I want to focus on Ukraine just for 1 second. Ukraine was known as the breadbasket of the world, or the breadbasket of the globe. I can't remember. But the point is, when the war kicked off overseas in a foreign country, there were massive fears that people in Africa were effectively going to starve to death. There was going to be mass famine because they couldn't get grain out of Ukraine to go to Africa. Why? Because Africa was relying entirely for its food sources and its food supply on another country, one that it has no control over, the political and military situation there. It makes you so vulnerable. That's not the fault of people in Africa, incidentally. I'm using it to illustrate a point. It's really, really dangerous. We should be self-sufficient, at least to survive, you know? Could we do without bananas for a few years? Yes. Could we do without all food for a few years? No, obviously not. So where exactly has all of this frustration and this ruckus come from? Well, I'll tell you where. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer here in the UK, in her latest budget basically said farmers are no longer exempt from inheritance tax. Now, why is that a problem? Well, it's a problem quite simply because farmers are obviously very asset rich. These fields and these farms that you see around me are worth a lot of money, a considerable amount of money. Everyone understands that. They're passed, typically, not always, from generation down to generation down to generation. And what do the children who inherit the farm do? They continue to farm. Okay? Now, if farmers were making extraordinary amounts of capital, then I would say, sure, we need to find a way to maybe tax that and generate more tax revenue for the rest of the country. And I'm not sure that would still be an inheritance tax, which I'm personally very opposed to anyway. But I could see a logic there. But the reality is, farmers don't make very much money.
Last year, England's farms made an average profit of £86,000, but 17% of them made no profit at all.
So even though the government has said you'll have 10 years to pay this tax, some farms have made calculations like we would have to pay 159% of our annual profits for 10 years to pay this off. So every bit of profit plus another 59%, and who knows where that's coming from, they would have to use that in order to pay off the tax bill from the inheritance tax. Well, that's obviously completely unrealistic. That simply isn't going to happen. So what are they going to do? They're going to sell. They're going to be forced to sell some or all of their land. That's what this bill, as far as I can see, is really about. It's about forcing smaller farmers who can't do crazy, tax planning and all of this stuff. It's basically forcing them to sell their land. These small farms, I mean, this could be a big farm, could be a part of a huge farm, I have no idea. But there are a lot of these small farmers who are going to be really affected. I mean, think about it. If your father bought a farm 50 years ago and it cost him £200,000 back then, and now suddenly it's worth £2 million, okay? Obviously you are asset rich. You could sell that and you could go and live a very comfortable life. Probably just live off the investments. I don't know what the interest rate is these days. Put it in some American stocks and you'll probably be good. But what do they do instead? They choose to farm. It's in their blood, it's in their DNA, it's in their family and their lineage. So they want to keep farming, which is good because I want them to keep farming because I like going to the supermarket and getting food. It's a very easy life in that respect. But they're being forced out of that position. Now, when their parents die, for example, and they have to pay inheritance tax on some of these extraordinary figures, and £2 million is actually very small. A lot of it's a lot higher than that. The only possible way that they can afford to pay those inheritance tax bills is going to be to sell at least a portion of their farm. Really, really unfortunate. Just to pay the tax man, So it's a tax raid. That's really all it is. That's designed to force farmers to sell up their land.
And my family's been on this land for 375 years. It breaks my heart to think that I could be the last generation here. I want to pass this down to my boys and make sure that they can make a living. Right. You're taking that away from me,
Gareth,
and away from thousands of farmers in the United Kingdom.
Before I get...
Shame on you.
Okay, so that still leaves a question. Why do the Labour Party so desperately want farmers to sell their land? And it all comes down to net zero, and I know that's going to sound crazy or conspiratorial, but it's not. It's really true. I've seen a lot of articles recently targeting farmers, saying that their practices are not environmentally friendly. Okay, saying that they contribute too much to emissions within the UK. And Keir Starmer has very recently signed a pledge to say that we'll get our emissions down by 81% by 2035.
Today I can confirm 3 months ahead of the deadline the UK's 2035 international target, our nationally determined contribution to reduce all greenhouse gas emissions by at least 81%.
So he, if he's taking this pledge seriously, has 11 years to reduce our emissions by 81%. That's insane. That's absolutely insane. Now, removing our farming is one way, but the second thing is, what can we do on this farming land? You've probably seen a few of them already, but this is a large, flat expanse. And what can we do with that? We can chuck solar panels everywhere. So we want to replace food farming with solar power farming, which to me is kind of insane. Really, really insane. But I truly believe that that's the plan, that's the intention. Everything drives towards net zero, net zero, net zero, net zero, no matter the cost. No matter the cost. Now, how are Labour going to dress this up in a way that makes it palatable for the general public? Well, I'll tell you how. They'll say that the pre-existing legislation has effectively become a tax loophole for the ultra wealthy. Someone who's amassed millions of pounds over their lifetime can at the moment buy farmland, pass it down to their children, and their children won't have to pay inheritance tax when they die, okay? I understand that that almost certainly happens in a minority of cases, a really small number of cases. But the fact that that does happen doesn't mean that you can introduce legislation that completely shafts every small farmer. And in fact, it's very easy. I can think of a bill just now off the top of my head which closes that tax loophole and leaves the genuine, honest small farmers alone. You just introduce a piece of legislation that says something like, if a piece of farmland is bought and then passed from one generation to the next, and the second generation either ceases farming or sells the land, then they're retrospectively due to pay inheritance tax. It's kind of that simple, right? I don't understand why we have to make it any more complicated than that. Then every generation could keep passing the farm all the way through to infinity. Britain has food forever. How is that a bad solution? I almost can't understand. Well, I can understand why they're doing it, truly, because I believe that they want to smash those net zero targets and build solar panels everywhere. But I can't understand how they think it's acceptable to behave in this way. That's the part I just truly can't fathom. Look at these deer. Isn't that amazing? I don't know if you can see them. Annie! 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 Don't you dare! Get back here. Annie! You get back here right now. Naughty, naughty girl. They're not your friends. They don't want to be friends with you. Very cool. Family of deer just running across the field. They won't be running across the solar farm anytime soon, will they? Okay, so how much money is this actually going to raise for the Treasury? Because we have to consider that, right? I guess that's the pros of this. The estimates are £500 million a year, which to you and to me sounds like a tremendous amount of money. But actually to the Treasury, it's nothing. To put that into perspective, every year we spend £4 billion housing illegal migrants who've come across the channel illegally. That's 8 times the amount that's going to be raised as we put our small farmers and small businesses out of business. You know, it's crazy. It's really, really crazy. We've got this weird saviour mentality in this country where we don't even view the rest of the world's citizens as equal to us anymore. We view them as superior or needing more help, and we'll always prioritise other people above our own citizens. It's so bizarre. And this trend, if it doesn't change, quite frankly, is going to see the UK just decline, 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 decline. And it's going to end up down there in the gutter, quite frankly. I don't see any way this is going to change, at least not for the next few years whilst we've got the Labour Party in power. I think Keir Starmer committing to an 81% reduction in emissions in 11 years is going to see this country decline very, very fast. Very fast. They're going to raise taxes, which they've already done, despite promising in... I don't know why we even read pre-election manifestos, because they're always full of crap anyway. But they're going to raise taxes, they're going to keep raising them. They're going to drain this country until it's absolutely bankrupt. Absolutely bankrupt. It's going to get worse before it gets better. But eventually, there will be a turning point, I believe, in the British psyche, where we simply won't accept those things anymore. And I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know which political party is going to find a resurgence. A lot of people are looking at reform. I don't know. but there's going to have to be some kind of big change in this country away from this uniparty system and to something new and fresh and a little bit exciting with some more radical solutions. I don't know what party that ends up being. All we can do is wait and see, I guess. Man, frustrating, really frustrating. I love my country, I really love my country, but the way it's going is just so sad. The more you love your country and the more you respect your country and its history and its culture and its heritage, the more sad it is and the more angry you get seeing it be destroyed right in front of you. So to people, when you complain and you moan and people say, oh, you don't really love England, all you do is ever complain about it. Yeah, I complain because I see how terribly things are going. Anyway, I got sidetracked from farmers a little bit there, didn't I? What are farmers going to do about this situation? Well, the first thing that I've heard posited, mostly just on social media and places like that, is that they're kind of going to go on a mini strike. And if it's true, it'd be the first farmers' strike, I think, that this country has ever seen. And so they simply won't deliver food to supermarkets for a little while. And I understand that'll be quite a small amount of time, but hopefully just enough to impress on people that they do need farmers. You rely on farmers to literally survive. I think that's quite a clever tactic. If they extend that for a longer period of time, it'll become very interesting because it becomes a war of wills. Farmers obviously then won't be making money because they won't be selling their products to supermarkets. So that's going to be a real test of their will. But at the same time, inflation is going to skyrocket. There'll be so few resources, so few pieces of meat and whatever vegetables in the supermarkets, and all the same people trying to buy them. Prices quite simply will go up. That's just the law of supply and demand. So you'll have this battle between the government, the Labour Party, and the farmers, basically just seeing who can last the longest, who can ride it out for the longest period of time. And I don't know what comes of that. The second thing that I've heard discussed is, and I never knew this, but my understanding is that farmers take a lot of sewage sludge and they use that for fertilizer, probably grossing a few people out right now who are eating. But they're potentially, the farmers are going to refuse to take that sewage sludge. Now, I don't fully understand the ramifications of that. My guess is that that sewage sludge probably just ends up in our rivers and the water companies pay a little fine from Ofwat, and that's all it ends up being. I don't fully understand. But again, it would be farmers hurting themselves because they wouldn't have the fertilizer for their crops. So it's a battle of the wills again, but it seems like the farmers are getting to a point where they're willing to engage in a battle of wills and see if they can force the government to change their position. Now, the third thing that I understand farmers are going to do is protest. And in fact, there's a big protest happening just next week, next Tuesday in London. I expect there'll probably be a few thousand people going. I will go and watch this protest. I wonder if Jeremy Clarkson will be there. I believe he will be there. It'll probably be the last protest I go to for a while. It costs quite a bit of money to actually go and film these protests, and I don't have unlimited amounts of money to just keep going and filming these protests, but I do think this one will be really, really important. And on the topic of that, I'm not, that sounds like I've got my begging bowl out. I haven't got my begging bowl out, but if you want to support the channel and you're not subscribed, just throwing in a subscription will be cool. I basically never ever ask people to subscribe, but I see on some of my videos I get 50, 60,000 views and so few people convert and subscribe, and that's fine, that's your decision. I almost feel needy asking people to subscribe, but it is beneficial. It does help the channel, and I guess it boosts my morale a little bit if you enjoy the content I make and the protests I cover and the documentaries and things like that, and the rants of me walking through cornfields that lazy farmers haven't been bothered to harvest this year. So yeah, go ahead, throw a subscribe, that'd be much appreciated. I'd be very, very grateful, genuinely. And before I go, I'll leave you with another famous Churchill quote delivered by farming MP Rupert Lowe, who I do have a lot of time for and a lot of respect for. I'll leave you with that quote about taxes.
As Winston Churchill presciently observed, we contend that for a nation to try to tax itself into prosperity is like a man standing in a bucket and trying to lift himself up by the handle.